She had packed this bag 3 times before. Each time, she had unpacked it again, folded the clothes back into drawers, put the bag back on top of the closet, where it was easier to pretend it wasn't there. This time felt different. She couldn't say why. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. In our last video, we looked at the 5 warning signs that researchers use to predict lethal domestic violence. We ended with one sentence, a sentence that, on its own, sounds like it should be good news. She was thinking about leaving. But the research tells us something that is deeply counterintuitive and deeply important. Leaving is not the moment the danger ends. For many women, it's the moment the danger becomes the highest it will ever be. This is why, and this is what happens, psychologically, to the person she is leaving. If someone you love has ever stayed in a relationship longer than you understood, if you've ever asked, why doesn't she just go, this video is for you? Because that question, asked with love, can still cause harm. Not because you're wrong to worry, but because it misunderstands what's actually happening. The data on this is consistent and has been for decades. Multiple studies, including foundational research by Dr. Jacqueline Campbell, whose danger assessment we covered last time, show that the period immediately following separation carries the highest risk of intimate partner homicide of any point in the relationship. Not the relationship itself, not the conflict within it, the leaving of it. To understand why, we need to look at what's happening inside the person being left, not to excuse it, but because understanding it is how risk gets identified before it becomes a headline. To most people, a breakup is painful. It's a loss. It often involves grief, anger, maybe relief. To someone whose sense of self is built around control over another person, separation is not experienced as a loss in the ordinary sense. Researchers describe it as something closer to an existential threat, a collapse of the entire structure that person has built their identity around. Remember from our last video, obsessive jealousy and extreme possessiveness aren't really about love. They're about ownership. When the owned person leaves, it isn't just a relationship ending. In the abuser's internal world, it can feel like losing control over reality itself. This is why the immediate response to separation is so often not sadness, but rage, or its quieter cousin, panic that looks like charm. Some abusers respond to separation with what researchers call hoovering, sudden, intense attempts to pull the victim back in. Apologies, promises, gifts. Declarations that he's changed, that he'll go to therapy, that this time will be different. Others respond with escalating threats. And some move between both charm one day, threats the next, which is itself a tactic, designed to create confusion and false hope. The common thread underneath all of it is the same, an attempt to regain control that has been lost. Research on intimate partner homicide has identified a pattern in the timeline of separation that is strikingly consistent across cases. The highest risk period is not the day someone leaves. It's the weeks and months that follow, particularly the first 3 months after separation, when most intimate partner homicides connected to a breakup occur. Why this specific window? Because it's the period when the reality of the separation becomes undeniable. The initial hope of reconciliation fades. Hoovering attempts haven't worked. The victim may be building a new life, a new home, new routines, sometimes a new relationship. For someone whose sense of control has already been shattered, each of these signs of the victim moving on can function as a fresh injury confirmation that the loss is real and permanent. This is also the period when stalking behavior often intensifies. Showing up at a workplace, driving past a new address, monitoring social media, using shared friends or family members, sometimes even children, to gather information or maintain contact. Individually, some of these behaviors can seem almost sympathetic from the outside. He's just having a hard time. He still loves her. But researchers identify this pattern persistent, unwanted contact following separation as one of the strongest predictors of escalation toward violence. This is the part of the conversation that's hardest to have, because it can sound like we're telling victims not to leave. We're not. Leaving is, in almost every case, the right long-term decision. But the research is clear that how someone leaves and what happens in the months after matters enormously for safety. Domestic violence advocates use a framework called safety planning. It's not a single document or a single moment. It's an ongoing process of preparing for the specific risks of separation, built around the individual situation. Safety planning can include things like securing copies of important documents in advance, identification, financial records, anything needed to start independently, identifying a safe place to go that the abuser doesn't know about, not a usual friend or family member's home, which is often the first place someone looks. Changing routines, routes to work, school pickup times in the weeks following separation, when stalking risk is highest. It can also include involving the legal system early, which is where protective orders come in, something we'll look at in a moment. The reason this matters so much is connected directly to what we discussed earlier. An abuser whose sense of control has been disrupted gradually through a safety plan that limits access to information about the victim's life is in a meaningfully different position than one who experiences separation as a sudden, total loss, with no remaining points of contact or control. This isn't about the victim doing more work to manage someone else's reaction. It's about recognizing that the most dangerous moment is also the moment that benefits most from preparation. In most jurisdictions, a victim can apply for a protective order, sometimes called a restraining order, that legally prohibits an abuser from contact or proximity. These orders matter. Research shows that for many victims, a protective order is associated with a reduction in violence, particularly less severe forms of abuse. But the research is also honest about their limits. A protective order is a piece of paper. It does not physically stop someone. Its effectiveness depends heavily on enforcement, and enforcement varies enormously between jurisdictions, and even between individual police responses on a given night. There's also a pattern researchers have flagged. For a small number of high-risk individuals, those who already show the warning signs from our last video, particularly obsessive jealousy and explicit threats, a protective order can, in rare cases, function as a trigger rather than a deterrent. Not because the order is wrong to seek, but because for someone already on an escalation trajectory, the formal legal acknowledgement that the relationship is over can intensify the crisis we described earlier. This is not an argument against protective orders. It's the reason advocates pair them with safety planning, rather than treating either alone as sufficient. The legal system provides a tool, but the research consistently shows that tool works best as part of a wider plan, not as a replacement for one. In recent years, some jurisdictions have introduced GPS monitoring for high-risk offenders and lethality assessment protocols, where police, at the scene of a domestic violence call, use a tool very similar to the danger assessment to flag cases that need immediate, coordinated follow-up. Where these protocols have been implemented well, early data suggests they reduce repeat violence. Where they haven't been adopted, the gap between what research recommends and what happens in practice remains significant. If you take one thing from this video, let it be this. The moment someone you love decides to leave is not the end of the story, and it's not necessarily the safest moment either. It's the beginning of the highest risk period, and the period where support matters most. That support doesn't need to be dramatic. It can be as simple as being reachable, helping with practical things, a place to stay, a ride, holding onto a bag of documents, not asking, "Why didn't you leave sooner?" but asking, "What do you need right now?" If you or someone you know is in this position, the National Domestic Violence Hotline and similar services in most countries can help build a safety plan specific to the situation, not just general advice, but a plan that accounts for the specific risks we've discussed today. In our last video, we looked at the signs that predict danger. Today, we looked at the moment those signs often become most acute. In the next video, we're going to look at a different side of this, the cases where, despite everything, it went wrong. Not to dwell on tragedy, but to understand, from the legal record, what the warning signs looked like in hindsight, and what changed, in policy and in law, because of them. I'm glad you're here.